Hey everyone, and welcome back to Sarah's Factory, where efficiency meets imagination. Today I will be guiding you through a step-by-step tutorial on how to craft two separate rustic-styled warehouses in vanilla mode Satisfactory. If you're brand new to building, don't worry, I'll walk you through the basics in this beginner-friendly build one step at a time, from layouts and color choice to efficient blueprint uses. And if you're a more advanced builder, stick around. We'll also be diving into detailing tricks, layering, and design choices that really bring this more advanced warehouse to life. By the end of this video, you won't just be building box factories anymore, you'll be creating stylized building designs. So, are you ready? Let's get building. So, I've gone ahead and I have given you guys my color choices and materials that I will be using for this first build. If you'd like, you can pause this part of the video to take a closer look at the color schematics. The colors are displayed on the signs, and I will add these to the video description as well so you can simply copy and paste into your own custom color swatches in your worlds. Next thing that I have gone ahead and done is I've laid out the basic foundations for my transportation using 4 truck stops for this build, making sure that each has its own lane and will not interfere with each other. To keep this build simple, we will be using a modular layout using a 16 by 12 meter blueprint as our base building block, so that we can easily edit this blueprint to create our other 3 blueprints for this build. So first thing that we're going to do is place down 6 meter high by 2 1 meter walls, then placing 2 panel windows on top of those, and then 2 1 meter walls overlapping those paneled windows to create our custom sized window. Nudging it by just 1 meter is going to allow us to place it down without the game giving us too much grief. Of course, we're going to cover these up using those small pillars on either side. We're also going to be using these pillars to give this build even more depth by bringing them out by just 1 meter, as well as taking the pillar and giving it a full length on either side and then overlapping it by 1 meter on each side from there. That's going to give us a very customized look. And now we're going to give this even more height using that small concrete pillar and then nudging it down by 2 meters, finishing it off on either side to make it match. Taking a hold of our painted beams and our brick beam color, we're going to pull it down by 1 meter and then 1 meter below that. We're going to go ahead and rotate this by 3 clicks to give it just a little bit more depth. Also placing 2 beam supports on either side and then finishing it off with a painted beam in that carbon steel finish and then nudging it down by a ½ meter, hitting Control Page Down. Now that we have the basics of this done, we're going to add even more detail using some label signs. First label sign that we're going to grab is going to be a 4 meter sign. Placing that on, we're now going to make this match the rest of our color scheme. Changing the layout, deleting that text, turning emission strength off, and then changing that base foundation to that foundation brick beam decor color. Using that, we're going to just copy it and paste it. And then we're going to fill in this middle area using that same technique, but now with a 2 meter sign. Again, deleting that text, changing that background color and emission strength off. Now we're just going to snap on to either side. Lovely. So now that that's done, we get to move on to our second blueprint. Our second blueprint is just going to have slightly larger windows, but overall it's going to be very similar to the first. So, using those blueprints, we're really allowing ourselves to work smarter and not harder. So we're going to pull out that first blueprint that we just made, and we're going to place it down in our blueprint designer. You can also just load it in and then rename it under a different name once you've made your adjustments. Making those adjustments, we're going to go ahead and bring down those panel windows, and then we're going to split these in half by using that small pillar. Placing it right in the middle and then pulling it up. Now that we have that, we're going to place those label signs and finish in the framing of the window You'll notice that I am not going to make this frame match up entirely to the bottom, but that's on purpose because we're going to add in an awning in just a little bit to give this window even more depth and texture. So now that we have the framing done, we are going to add in a little bit of a crosshair on either side, and then adding in that awning on the bottom, using that painted beam, and then simply rotating it by 3 clicks to give it that extra little bit of oomph. And with that, our second blueprint is done. So we're going to go ahead and save this and work on our next one. Our next one is going to be extremely simple. We're just going to get rid of this window entirely and then pull those basic walls down so it's a nice, pretty blank wall. Now that we have all those blueprints finished, we get to go ahead and snap them onto each other. Using that blueprint snapping mode, it's going to make it super easy to just nudge them right on top of each other. And of course, a factory would not be complete without those beautiful machines to lay on the inside. Placing down my constructors in a manufacturer, we're going to be using this build to create my singularity cells for my space elevator parts. I can't wait to see my tractors drive through here, deliver all of their goods, and pick up those singularity cells to happily deliver them to my space elevator. I think that this is looking amazing so far. We are going to go ahead from here, add in the rest of those blueprint walls to finish encapsulating this all together. And there we have a finished building. But of course, we're not going to stop here. We're going to add in some extra little details using, of course, a blueprint just to make our lives that much easier. First, starting with that small pillar support and then grabbing a small metal pillar to go onto that. We're going to nudge it down by 2 meters just so it's a little bit lower. Then using a large fan, we're going to snap this on right onto the top. I think we're going to nudge it down maybe by just a ½ meter, again by hitting Control and Page down. That's going to really allow us to have a very customized look to this blueprint. And now that we have those blueprints done, we get to be a little bit creative on where we want to place down these roof fans. I'm just gonna kind of place them wherever I feel like, honestly. Whatever feels good and natural for this build itself. The reference photo that I was using actually has these really cool fluid buffers that are in this IRL warehouse. Unfortunately, this build doesn't use them, but why not just put some on just because? I think it just adds that extra little oomph and gives this build even more personality. And I think with that, this build is all finished. We're just gonna take a moment to soak up all of our hard work and enjoy the fruits of our labor. And break is done. Get back at it, Pioneer. It is time to start our advanced build. First thing, as well as with our last, we're going to start off with those color schemes. Feel free to give this video a pause so you can follow along and build this build exactly like I did. And I have, of course, gone ahead and put down my 2 truck stops to make this build happen. And we're going to go ahead and start with our basic blueprint build. So same thing as our last one, we're going to be using blueprints to make this build come to life and make our lives even that much easier. Saving our blueprints along the way is going to really allow us to save time. So making sure that when you are building your blueprints, take a moment to save those drafts so that way you have a wonderful building block to work off of and use those extra little building pieces to make your build come to life. And this is the advanced build, so we are going to be using a 1.5 foundations to give this build just a little bit of extra detail and feel less boxy. I've gone ahead and I've placed a 1 meter wall onto those foundations, and now we're going to take just a basic 1 meter concrete wall with no extra edited color, and we're going to make it come out by a ½ meter. Then taking a round concrete beam, we're just going to place it on top of that 1 meter wall. And then, of course, that beautiful painted beam in that brick color, we're going to rotate it by 3 clicks, just right on top, 1 meter high from that round pillar. And with that, we have the basic skirt of this building done. Now we get to have some fun and add in those windows. Of course, using some small concrete pillars, we're going to pull this up 4 high on either side, making sure that it is lining up with those foundations themselves, because this blueprint is going to just snap one right on top of the other with no overlapping involved. Using that trick of nudging it in by just a 1/2 meter on either side, just to make it overlap enough to create that nice seamless look. And then, of course, making the bottom come up a little bit by using the same trick. And we are going to add in that window awning using a painted beam and then clicking it 2 rotations down. That's going to give it that nice realistic feel, of course, because each awning in the real world is going to nudge down a little bit so that rain doesn't get into the window. Of course, we're going to finish this window with a window using that panel window, making sure that we're finding the middle. I'm also going to use my trick where I'm going to nudge this panel window down by 1 meter just to give it an even extra little detail. Now, here comes the fun part. We're going to be using a painted beam to frame in this window, but we're going to go the extra mile. We're going to nudge it in and then over by 1/2 meter. Then rotating it by just 1 click, it's going to give us that nice, pretty, extra little bit of detail without it feeling like it is too bulky. So again, we're going to push it in by a 1/2 meter, nudge it over by a 1/2 meter, and then click it 1 rotation outwards. To finish the top of this rounded window, we're just going to put a 1 meter painted beam, but we're going to nudge it in by a 1/2 meter. That's also going to be sticking out by just a little bit as well. Putting it into diagonal mode, we're going to connect the very top of this so that it creates that nice pretty arch. This build also has a nice little detail where the top of this kind of sticks out a little bit, so pushing it in by a 1/2 meter on each side just to make sure that it hits the middle is going to give us that effect. And now we just get to simply fill in the top of this using those small concrete pillars. We're just going to make them clip onto each other and then overlap ever so slightly to finish in the top of this window. And of course, we are going to take a moment to save this. And now we are going to finish in the very top of this. So this is the icing on the top. Adding in a lot of detail here. This is going to go a long way. We're going to pull a painted beam through, rotate it by 3 clicks. We're then going to take another painted beam, place it on top of that one, and then bring it up by a 1/2 meter. That is going to be in a slightly different color, of course. Using a shelf beam, we're going to pull it across, up by a 1/2 meter, and then we're going to rotate it 3 clicks forward. And then we're going to drop it down by 1 meter. That's going to give us that lovely extra texture that really stands out and makes this build come to life. Now, using an H-beam, we're going to pull that up by a 1/2 meter just to make the top of this look nice and clean. And now on to the second blueprint. We're going to make an extra large arched window that is going to be 2 foundations wide. So we do get to use the blueprint that we've already made, but we are going to make it a little bit thicker, adding that 1/2 foundation so that it is 2 foundations wide. I am going to, just for the purpose of this video, add in those 1/2 walls and go the extra mile of making this actually centered. Now, you don't have to do this. You could just use the foundation bed skirt that we made in the first build and work off of that. But just to make it kind of seem a little bit more put together, I'm gonna go ahead and just add in these extra concrete pillars onto the side and pull it through. I'm then going to take the very icing on top of the cake and bring it through as well. So we're just matching what we've done before and pulling it through by that 2 meters. And ta-da! We have an extra large window. Of course, to go with that extra large window, we need to make the window extra large. So we're going to take those painted beams, we're going to pull them down using that diagonal mode. And then we're going to take those small concrete pillars and fill in the top here. And of course, I am a perfectionist, so I'm going to take those small concrete pillars, attach them to the actual arch of the window, and then nudge them in to where they match. Also pulling down that window, adding in that extra panel, and then finishing it off with that carbon steel finish. Now we get to add in the awning of the window using a painted beam in that carbon steel finish and rotating it by 3 clicks. Finishing off the arch, we're going to take a 1 meter beam and nudge it over by a 1/2 meter on either side. We get to have some fun framing this in. We're going to bring it in by 1/2 meter and over a 1/2 meter, and then we're going to give it just 1 click rotation. That's going to give it just a little bit of extra overlap so that it is not looking too bulky, but it is going to give this build a nice extra texture. We're going to do that twice so that way it has this nice little rounded edge. And that was placed by putting a beam just a meter over. Also using those beams, we're going to use diagonal mode and make it just fall into those nice rounded pillars to give it a complete look. Using the same method that we used in our first build, we're going to be placing down those blueprints and giving them just a little extra depth by nudging them a meter or 2 out. We're going to be working on the entrance and exit to this build next, placing, of course, that same paneled window and then some small concrete pillars to fill in the top here. Using those beams, we're going to add even more detail and texture, pulling across and giving it a 2-click rotation. Also framing in this entire opening and then pulling through on top of the door, rotating it by 3 clicks and bringing it in by a 1/2 meter. Using different colors, we're going to give this door even extra detail, and then topping it off with that H-beam with 1/2 meter nudge down. And with that, we have our first level complete. So we're going to start making the blueprints for the top level now. I had a lot of fun making this rounded window, and we are going to be using those small concrete pillars to make this entire wall. We are going to be making this wall a 1.5 wide, and then we're going to find the exact center here by placing some small concrete pillars right on top of each other and making them overlap. That should line up perfectly in the middle. And now we're going to take that painted beam and we're going to find the exact middle here by nudging a painted beam over and down by a 1/2 meter, pulling it up to match. And then we're going to do the same thing on the sides here, finding the center and then making it match on the opposite side. Now we get to put our beams into diagonal mode, and we're going to give them a slight rotation outwards, 1 click. We're not going to stop there. We're going to grab a shelf beam and we're going to give our little sides just a little extra texture by rotating it about 2 clicks forward. Great. Now we're going to grab that full frame window and we are going to just nudge it in by a 1/2 meter and pull it up. That way this window is an actual window. And this blueprint is going to be snapping right on top of our first blueprint, which was that 1.5 wide one. Now we get to make this really fun 2 foundation wide wall, which is going to host our extra large arched window. Using a beam, we're going to pull up by 9 meters and then 3 meters onto the side, placing 1 meter on each side from the center, and then connecting those 2 points to make that angle. Finding the midpoint here, we're going to pull over 2 meters up and to the sides, and that's going to give us a very nice snapping point to finish this arch. Putting those beams into freeform mode, we're just going to go along and snap them in, making sure that we are snapping onto the correct beam as we go. Once we've decided that that arch is looking good, we're going to get rid of that scaffolding and we're going to finish in the detail with some shelf beams. Using that freeform method, we're going to give these beams 3 clicks of a rotation, so that way they're sticking out just a little bit, just enough to make these beams look like they're attached a little bit cleaner. It's going to hide the fact that they don't actually connect perfectly. Of course, this is also going to need an awning, so we're going to use a painted beam and pull it over 12 meters. That is going to be the width of the window. And we are going to then make it even extra wide. We are going to take that shelf beam, pull it out, and make sure that it is lined up with the actual window itself. Giving it a rotation to square it off, we're going to overlap one on top of the other. We do need to be mindful that these pillars are going to not overlap the window themselves, so we are going to snap the pillars onto the beams that are making this arch, and we're going to nudge them up by a ½ meter. From there, we're going to finish it off by making the top of this just look nice and clean and putting those paneled windows in. Being mindful that we don't want this to have any gaps, so we're just going to pull it up by a ½ meter. Amazing, and that is finished with our large arched window. Now we're going to finish in the roof of this build. I have gone ahead and conceptualized what I want it to look like. All we have to do is make the opposite side here match. So here we are taking those blueprints and we are just nudging them to where they sit right on top of one another. That's the amazing thing about using these modular blueprints, is that they are really versatile and they're going to allow us to make our builds look like whatever we want. You don't have to make your build look just like mine. You can use this and make a variety of different styles. Finishing the roof, we are going to be using that metal finish and just pulling it through so it lines up with the corners of the walls that we've made. Of course, we're going to make the top of this look nice and finished using those painted beams. We're just going to snap them onto the edges of the roof and then taking those small concrete pillars and putting them right on top of those beams. I am going to take a little extra moment here to finish in all of these holes on the sides and just try to make it as clean as possible. With that, we are also going to mess with the depth of the roof. So we're going to make this roof come out by a ½ meter nudge. And that's going to give that a lot of extra detail for a very easy method. Also placing those small concrete pillars onto the sides, we're just going to snap them onto the roof itself. And then we get to use a really cool technique of placing a wall onto that pillar and then taking a beam, placing it onto that wall, and then pulling it up and through onto those pillars that we just placed. For some reason, that painted beam is just going to ever so slightly sit in front, and it's going to give us this really cool colored texture. We're then going to go just a little bit extra with it and place that painted beam right on top and give it just a single 1 click forward, just to give it even more texture. I really love how this method works out, and for whatever reason, it works really well. So again, using that small concrete pillar, we're going to attach it to the wall that we've already placed. And then we're going to attach that basic wall to the very edge of that pillar. Pulling down a painted beam, we're going to make it line up with those pillars and then overlap a beam on top with a one-click rotation forward. Of course, we're going to make this roof look nice and polished, so we're going to line up these pillars very meticulously to where they sit at a very nice, clean, finished angle. Of course, though, we are going to start adding in some detail, finishing off the roof here first. Using a painted beam and rotating it by 3 clicks, we're going to be able to find that exact apex point for our small pillar to connect onto. I am absolutely loving this build. We're going to finish in the sides with one more blueprint. This one is only going to be 2 walls high, so 2 pillars high, and then we are going to finish off the top and make it come in so that way those pillars overlap by just a hair. Placing those panel windows in, making sure that they line up with the actual openings that we are creating, and then we're going to use my method where we pull it down by a 1 meter nudge. Now we get to have fun with detailing the frame of these windows. So of course we're going to put an awning and then just some basic frames around the edges, nothing fancy here. Using diagonal mode, we're just going to round off the top of these windows and making sure that they do not have any gaps at the top. We're going to, of course, go the extra mile and we're going to make an extra frame on the outside, nudging it in by a 1/2 meter and over a 1/2 meter, and then giving it just 1 click rotation outwards. That way, again, it's just going to give it that extra detail without it looking too clunky. Finishing off the top of this frame, we just have to be mindful that it's going to line up, so we're going to nudge it over by a 1/2 meter, and then we're going to pull it in a 1/2 meter. Then we're just going to give it just a couple of clicks rotations, about 2 or so, to finish off the top of that beautiful framed window. Using the blueprint we just made, we're going to place those in the middle and then finish the sides with that circle window blueprint from before. Here's a fun part where we're going to be making these detailed support structures. Placing some beams on top of a 1 meter wall, we're going to make a funny little triangle 3 meters high, 3 meters wide. Then using diagonal mode at 1.41, we're going to pull that up by a 1/2 meter, and then we're going to just simply connect those points together using freeform. Using that same method of that diagonal 1.14, we're going to nudge those down by a 1/2 meter to give this a really cool finish on the edge. Finishing off, we're going to layer some beams right on top of each other by placing it in by a 1/2 meter and then giving it some rotation so it looks a little bit more rounded. Here I am using the blueprints I've made to finish off the opposite side with this build. Also adding in some 1 meter high walls on the edges just to make it look like it has a little bit of a lip. Now we get to make these really cool, fun little accent pieces. The first one is my favorite one. We're gonna make this little bird that's gonna sit on the very apex of the roof on either side. Using angled beams, we're going to attach some signs onto those to make this bird look like it has its wings nice and wide. We're going to then get rid of the supports and change the color of these signs so they're going to match the beam color. Again, changing that layout, getting rid of the text and turning that emission strength off to make it match. Pull up a painted beam, give it some rotations, and then drop it down by a 1/2 meter nudge to finish that fun bird accent. The next piece is going to be our corners for the roof themselves. We're going to take a beam, pull it up 1 meter, and then we're going to take another beam and we're going to nudge it to create a 1.5 meter tall beam. There we are going to attach a beam onto the top and make it a rotation 3 clicks. Also on the sides, we're going to pull up a 1 meter high beam, and then we're going to pull down a beam and give it a rotation so that way it lines up. Using that method from before, we're going to overlap those to make it look like it has that nice circle detail to it. Doing the same thing here, we're going to make it line up using those half nudges and then kind of just rotating them until we are happy with whatever kind of circle shape we want to make. Doesn't have to be perfect, it's going to get the point across. Now that we have those little detail blueprints done, we are going to finish off the roof here using some copper finish concrete walls, using that ramp wall in that 4 meters to line up with the roof. You have to be very careful when you're doing this because sometimes these don't want to line up perfectly. So I actually had to redo this a couple of times just to make sure that the actual walls were lining up with each other. And in the end, it didn't even line up all the way. But that's okay because we're going to be hiding that with that little bird detailed blueprint that we just made. Also taking a painted beam in that brick detailed color, we're going to add a little extra pop of color here with a rotated beam that's just going to line up with the bottom of that wall. Now we get to put the icing on the cake. Placing those detailed blueprints that we made earlier, we're just going to make them line up with those walls so that way it gives it that nice finished clean look. Now we're also going to add those basic 1 meter walls to the top of that roof to give it a little bit of a lip, and finishing off the tippity top with those cool little bird roof details. Love the way that those birds really make the top of that roof stand out. We're also going to take a painted beam, just like before, to add that extra detail by nudging it in and then giving it some rotations so that way the color comes through, but it is just very subtle. Now we get to add in this really cool sunroof greenhouse detail. Using this color and all 3 beams that we have available, we're going to be creating this little structure and we're just going to freehand it here. So framing in that roof, making sure that those painted beams are lined up with the edges, and then pulling up those painted beams on the sides 3 meters high. Now on this next part, do be mindful when you're placing in the top parts of these beams that you are placing them down to where they match up with their corresponding side. I did make the mistake of not nudging one over by a 1/2 meter and it messed up all of my attachment points from there. So I did have to go back and redo it. It wasn't a super big deal, but it's just something to make sure to be mindful of when you're creating these kind of barred window effects here. Placing them so they're just 1 meter off from each other, we're going to just go around and finish in the barred part of this greenhouse. Now that we have the barred section done, we are going to use our favorite detailing beam, those shelf beams, and we're just going to put them right on top of those horizontal beams that we have placed on the top here. Of course, we're going to also do that onto the sides as well. So just using that freeform mode, we can just snap one beam right onto the other. I'll be using my favorite technique next to finish the detailing of this roof. Taking our plain painted beam, we are going to nudge it down by a 1/2 meter and then give it about 2 clicks rotations so that way that shelf beam is overlapping that painted beam to create that really fun texture, almost looking like it would be the top of a roof. To make everything line up, we're just going to place a painted beam across the top here, so that way we can put in our glass roof to encase the top of this roof. Nudging it in by just that ½ meter, we're going to just fill it in and pull it through. Now we're going to go the extra mile and add in some full frame windows onto the barred section of this greenhouse. Of course, we can't put them onto the fronts because it's going to be at an angle, but honestly, no one's really going to notice. Finishing the very top of this, we're going to be using that favorited shelf beam, rotating it so that it matches up with the same angle of the roof to lay nice and flat. Also pulling them up onto each side to hide away those roof seams, just kind of meticulously placing them in one by one. From here, we're just gonna give the build one more once over and deciding kind of what we want to add. I have decided that these little sections on the front needed just a little something more, so I've just placed some pillars ever so slightly offset on the front. On the inside, I've added in my lighting blueprint and just standard lights. Of course, I also added in my factory. So this factory is making my cooling systems and will be delivering these to my adjacent factories to work towards all of my space elevator parts. And there we have it. Utilizing blueprints and fun detailing work, we have crafted ourselves two very fine and satisfactory warehouses to add to our ever-growing factory world. Whether you followed along step by step or just picked up a few design ideas, I hope this gave you some inspiration for blending efficiency and imagination in your own worlds. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you love realistic factory builds like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss future tutorials, guides, and world tours. Thanks for visiting Sarah's Factory, and I hope to see you sometime soon on my Twitch stream. Until then, have fun building!